Sarah Matthews thought it was going to be just another quiet Tuesday evening at the small convenience store where she worked part-time. The 28-year-old former Navy SEAL had traded her combat boots for civilian shoes only 6 months earlier, hoping to find peace in the simple routine of scanning barcodes and restocking shelves. But some habits die hard, and some instincts never fade. When the bell above the door chimed at 9:47 p.m., Sarah barely looked up from counting the register. She'd seen hundreds of late-night customers shuffle through those doors during her shifts. What she didn't expect was to come face-to-face with a man whose hands were shaking, whose eyes were wild with desperation, and whose jacket barely concealed the outline of a weapon. In the span of 3 seconds, Sarah's world shifted from mundane to dangerous. Her military training kicked in like muscle memory, but outwardly, she remained perfectly calm. The man stammered his demands, waving what appeared to be a gun in her direction. Other customers froze in terror. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Then Sarah did something that would change everything. She looked the would-be robber straight in the eyes, crossed her arms, and with ice-cold composure said 5 words that would echo through local news stations for weeks to come. "Go ahead," she said coolly. What happened next would prove that some people should never be underestimated, and that the most dangerous person in any room isn't always the one holding the weapon. This is the true story of a chance encounter that revealed the extraordinary courage hidden in an ordinary moment, and why you should never, ever threaten someone whose calm demeanor might just be the most terrifying thing about them. Sarah Matthews had always been good at blending in. At 5'6" with shoulder-length brown hair and an easy smile, she looked like any other young woman you might pass on the street. That was exactly how she liked it. After 8 years in the Navy SEALs, where standing out could mean the difference between life and death, anonymity felt like a luxury she'd earned. The Riverside convenience store sat on the corner of 5th and Main in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a small city where everyone knew their neighbors, and the biggest excitement usually came from the Friday night high school football games. Sarah had taken the evening shift 6 months ago, not because she needed the money, her military pension and savings were more than adequate, but because she needed something to do with her hands and her mind while she figured out what came next. The transition from military to civilian life hadn't been as smooth as she'd hoped. The silence was the hardest part. After years of constant noise, engines roaring, orders being shouted, gunfire crackling through communication devices, the quiet of small-town Iowa felt almost oppressive. The convenience store job gave her something familiar, a routine, a mission, people to protect, even if that protection just meant making sure Mrs. Henderson got her evening medications from behind the counter or helping teenage kids figure out which energy drink would get them through their homework. On this particular Tuesday evening in October, the autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of an early winter. Sarah had arrived for her shift at 3 p.m., relieving Danny, the college kid who worked days and always left the counter slightly sticky from the soda he inevitably spilled. She'd spent the afternoon restocking the coolers, organizing the magazine rack, and helping the usual parade of customers: construction workers grabbing coffee, mothers picking up milk on their way home, elderly residents buying lottery tickets with the same numbers they'd been playing for decades. By 9 p.m., the store had settled into its familiar evening rhythm. The dinner rush was over, and the late-night crowd hadn't quite started yet. Sarah was working through her mental checklist for closing procedures when she noticed him through the large front windows. He was pacing outside, back, and forth along the sidewalk in front of the store. At first glance, he looked like any other person walking through the neighborhood, but Sarah's trained eye picked up details that most people would miss. His movements were erratic, not the purposeful stride of someone heading home or the casual stroll of someone enjoying the evening air. He kept looking toward the store, then away, then back again. His hands moved restlessly at his sides, and, even from inside, Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. Sarah had learned long ago to trust her instincts. During her military service, that intuition had saved her life more times than she could count. In Afghanistan, she'd once felt something was wrong about a seemingly quiet street, just minutes before an IED exploded exactly where her unit would have been walking. In Somalia, a gut feeling about a friendly local had led her to discover a planned ambush that could have wiped out her entire squad. Now, watching the man outside, she felt that same familiar prickle of awareness creeping up the back of her neck. She continued her work, but kept one eye on the windows. The man stopped pacing and stood directly in front of the store entrance for several long moments. Through the glass, Sarah could see his face more clearly now. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of desperate expression she'd seen before on people who'd been pushed to their breaking point. His clothes were rumpled, as if he'd been wearing them for days, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Sarah quietly reached under the counter and touched the silent alarm button, not pressing it, just locating it. She also mentally cataloged the store's layout. 2 other customers currently inside, an elderly man reading magazines near the back, and a middle-aged woman selecting ice cream from the freezer section. The rear exit was 30 feet away, unlocked as required by fire code. Her cell phone was in her pocket, fully charged. The man outside took a step toward the door, then stopped. He reached into his jacket, and Sarah's muscles tensed automatically. But he only pulled out a cell phone, stared at it for a moment, then put it back without making a call. The gesture seemed to drain something from him, and his shoulders sagged as if he was carrying an invisible weight. Sarah had seen that look before, too. It was the expression of someone who'd run out of options. At 9:30, the elderly man bought his magazine and left, offering Sarah a friendly goodnight that she returned with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The woman with the ice cream was taking her time, reading nutrition labels with the careful attention of someone trying to make a healthy choice, or perhaps just avoiding going home to whatever was waiting for her there. The man outside had resumed his pacing, but now his movements had taken on a different quality. Where before he'd seemed nervous and uncertain, now there was a sense of building resolution in his posture. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the body language of someone who'd made a decision, even if it was the wrong one. She casually walked to the front of the store, pretending to straighten a display of candy bars near the window. Up close, she could see more details about the potential threat outside. He was thin, probably undernourished, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested too much time indoors. Dark circles under his eyes indicated he hadn't been sleeping well. His clothes were cheap, but not dirty. Someone trying to maintain dignity despite difficult circumstances. Most importantly, Sarah could now see the outline of something bulky in his jacket pocket. It could have been a wallet or a phone, but the way he kept touching it suggested something else entirely. The woman finally made her ice cream selection and approached the counter. Sarah rang up her purchase, vanilla. She noted a safe choice and made small talk about the weather while keeping the man outside in her peripheral vision. As the customer left, Sarah noticed the man's head turn to watch her go. He was counting customers, determining when the store would be most vulnerable. Sarah had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize the signs of an impending attack. The nervous energy, the surveillance of the target, the building resolution, it all added up to someone preparing to do something desperate. The question wasn't if he would try something, but when she considered her options. She could call the police right now, but what would she tell them? A man was walking outside her store, looking nervous, without any concrete threat or illegal action. They'd likely tell her to call back if something actually happened. She could lock the doors early, but that might just postpone the problem or escalate it in unpredictable ways. Instead, Sarah did what she'd been trained to do. She prepared for multiple scenarios while projecting an appearance of complete normalcy. She moved around the store, creating what appeared to be busy work, but was actually tactical positioning. She checked the sight lines from the entrance, identified potential cover behind the counter and end caps, and made sure her path to the rear exit remained clear. She also inventoried potential weapons within reach, not guns, of course, but everyday objects that could be used for defense if necessary. At 9:45, the man outside stopped pacing and stood directly in front of the entrance again. This time, Sarah could see his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if he was hyperventilating or trying to work up courage. He reached into his jacket again, and this time his hand stayed there. Sarah positioned herself behind the counter, maintaining a relaxed posture while ensuring she had maximum mobility and access to both the silent alarm and her cell phone. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, a technique she'd mastered during underwater demolition training where staying calm literally meant staying alive. The bell above the door chimed as the man entered. Sarah looked up with the same friendly smile she'd given to hundreds of customers before him. "Good evening," she said cheerfully. "How can I help you?" But even as she spoke, every muscle in her body was coiled and ready, every sense heightened to maximum alertness. The ordinary Tuesday evening was about to become anything but ordinary, and Sarah Matthews, former Navy SEAL, guardian of classified secrets, veteran of operations that would never be publicly acknowledged, was ready for whatever came next. The man's hand was still inside his jacket, and his eyes held the wild desperation of someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. The young man stepped through the entrance with the unsteady gait of someone whose legs might give out at any moment. Sarah maintained her welcoming expression while her tactical mind automatically cataloged every detail. Approximately 5'9", maybe 140 pounds, right-handed based on which pocket his hand remained buried in, pupils dilated suggesting either drugs or extreme stress, visible tremor in his free hand. "I need," he started, then stopped, his voice cracking like a teenager asking someone prom. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I need you to give me everything in the register." The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a gun that hadn't been fired yet. Sarah blinked once, slowly, processing not just what he'd said, but how he'd said it. There was no conviction in his voice, no practiced menace of someone who'd done this before. This was someone playing a role he'd never auditioned for, reading lines from a script he'd never wanted to memorize. "I'm sorry," Sarah replied, tilting her head slightly as if she hadn't quite heard him correctly. It was a technique she'd learned during interrogation training. Sometimes appearing confused or making someone repeat themselves could defuse a situation by breaking the perpetrator's momentum. The man's composure cracked a little more. "The money," he said, louder now, but still shaky. "Give me all the money in the cash register." His hand moved inside his jacket, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something dark and metallic. Sarah had been held at gunpoint before, in situations far more dangerous than a convenience store robbery. She'd had actual terrorists point actual assault rifles at her head while she maintained her cover during deep insertion missions. She'd sat calmly through interrogations by hostile forces who would have killed her without a second thought if they discovered her true identity. This nervous young man with his trembling voice and obvious reluctance was, frankly, amateur hour. But that didn't make him any less dangerous. In Sarah's experience, amateurs were often more unpredictable than professionals. A career criminal might rob a store efficiently and leave without unnecessary violence. Someone desperate and inexperienced might panic and do something that would destroy multiple lives in a split second. "Okay," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying the same tone she might use to discuss the weather. "I can help you with that. But I need to ask you to show me your hands first." The request seemed to confuse him. Most convenience store clerks would be reaching for the register by now, possibly crying or begging. They wouldn't be making polite requests like they were conducting a customer service transaction. "What?" he stammered. "Your hands," Sarah repeated patiently. "I need to see both of your hands before I can open the register. It's store policy for security purposes." It wasn't store policy, of course, but Sarah had learned that people in stressful situations often defaulted to following instructions, especially when those instructions sounded official and were delivered with authority. It was a psychological principle she'd exploited countless times during military operations. The man hesitated, clearly not expecting this response. "I've got a gun," he said, as if clarifying a misunderstanding rather than making a threat. "I figured that might be the case," Sarah replied conversationally. "That's why I need to see your hands. Company liability and all that. Insurance requirements, you know how it is." Her casual tone was having exactly the effect she'd hoped for. Instead of the dramatic confrontation he'd probably imagined, this was feeling more like a bureaucratic procedure. The adrenaline-fueled momentum that had carried him through the door was dissipating into confusion and uncertainty. During her military service, Sarah had been involved in dozens of hostage situations and armed standoffs. She'd learned that the first few moments were crucial. They set the tone for everything that followed. If you could disrupt a perpetrator's expected script early on, you could often redirect the entire encounter. "Look, lady, I'm serious," the man said, but there was a plaintive quality to his voice now, as if he was asking for her cooperation rather than demanding it. "I'm sure you are," Sarah agreed reasonably, "and I want to help you. But I'm going to need you to work with me here. What's your name?" "My name." The question clearly caught him off guard. "It just makes this easier if I know what to call you," Sarah explained. "I'm Sarah, by the way. I've been working here for about 6 months now. Nice to meet you, even under these circumstances." The surreal politeness of the conversation was clearly not what the young man had expected. He'd probably rehearsed this scenario in his head dozens of times, imagining terrified screaming, dramatic threats, maybe even a heroic chase scene. He hadn't prepared for someone who treated an armed robbery like an awkward social introduction. My name is Marcus, he said finally, apparently unable to think of a reason not to answer. Nice to meet you. Marcus, Sarah said with genuine warmth. Now, I want to help you get what you need, but I'm going to need to see that weapon you mentioned. Just so we're both clear on the situation. Marcus hesitated again, his hand moving uncertainly inside his jacket. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across his face. The part of him that wanted to maintain the threatening facade warring with the part that recognized he was interacting with someone who seemed genuinely interested in helping him. I don't want to hurt anyone, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back for hours. I just need the money. It's not for drugs or anything like that. It's for my mom. She's sick, and the insurance won't cover her treatments anymore, and we're about to lose the house, and I don't know what else to do. There was the real story behind the desperate eyes and shaking hands. Sarah felt a familiar pang of sympathy, the same feeling she'd experienced countless times when dealing with people who'd been pushed beyond their limits by circumstances beyond their control. During her deployments, she'd met plenty of people who'd made terrible choices not because they were bad people, but because they saw no other options. That sounds really difficult. Marcus, she said sincerely. Taking care of someone you love when the system isn't working for you. That's one of the hardest things anyone can face. Marcus's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected compassion in her voice. You understand? Ido, Sarah replied. My father went through cancer treatment a few years back. The financial stress on top of everything else, it can make you feel like you're drowning. It was a lie, but a useful one. Sarah's father had died in a car accident when she was 12, years before she'd ever considered military service. But she'd seen enough medical bankruptcies and insurance nightmares during her time in the service to speak convincingly about the experience. Exactly, Marcus said, his voice carrying the relief of someone who finally felt heard. Everyone keeps telling me there are resources and assistance programs, but none of them actually help. The social worker says we make too much money to qualify for aid, but we don't make enough to actually pay for treatments. It's like they designed the system to fail people like us. The middle gets squeezed, Sarah agreed. Too much for help, not enough to handle alone. For a moment, Marcus's hand relaxed inside his jacket, and Sarah could see some of the tension leave his shoulders. This was the moment she'd been working toward, the point where his emotional defenses were down, and she could potentially redirect the situation without violence. But then, reality seemed to crash back over him like a cold wave. His face hardened again, and his grip tightened on whatever he was holding. But talking about it doesn't fix anything, he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier desperation. I need money tonight. The final notice came yesterday. If I don't come up with $3,000 by tomorrow morning, they're going to foreclose on our house. My mom will be out on the street, and without a stable address. The medical center says they can't continue her treatments. Sarah absorbed this information quickly. $3,000 was far more than any convenience store would have in its register, especially at the end of a Tuesday evening. If that was really his target amount, he was either wildly optimistic about cash-heavy businesses or desperate enough to attempt multiple robberies in a single night. Marcus, she said gently, I want to help you, but I need you to understand something. Even if you took every dollar in this register, it's probably not going to be more than a few $100s. We don't keep large amounts of cash on hand. Most people pay with cards these days. The information hit him like a physical blow. She could see the moment when the futility of his plan truly sank in, when the last desperate hope he'd been clinging to crumbled away. A few hundred? He repeated weakly. But I need 3,000. I know, Sarah said quietly. And what you need is more than what's here. Marcus stood frozen for a long moment, his face cycling through a series of expressions, disappointment, despair, anger, and, finally, a kind of hollow resignation that was somehow worse than any of the others. Then, what am I supposed to do? He asked, and for the first time since he'd entered the store, he sounded like exactly what he was, a scared kid who'd run out of options, and was about to lose everything that mattered to him. It was then that Sarah made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Sarah looked at Marcus for a long moment, seeing not the would-be robber with his hand on a weapon, but the broken young man underneath, someone who loved his mother enough to risk everything. even if his plan was doomed to fail. It reminded her of something her unit commander used to say: sometimes the bravest thing you can do is the stupidest thing you can do. The difference is in the details. Marcus, she said quietly, I want you to very slowly take your hand out of your jacket and show me what you're holding. Why? He asked suspiciously, some of the fight coming back into his voice. Because I think you and I need to have an honest conversation, and I can't do that while you're pretending to threaten me. The words hung between them like a challenge. Marcus's face went through another series of expressions as he processed what she'd just said. Pretending, he said, his voice rising. Lady, I've got a gun pointed at you right now. This isn't pretending. Sarah took a step closer to the counter, moving with the same casual confidence she'd shown throughout their entire interaction. Marcus, I've had guns pointed at me by people who actually wanted to use them. You're not one of those people. How can you know that? He demanded, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice again. Because you've been holding whatever that is for almost 10 minutes now, and your hand is still in your pocket, Sarah explained patiently. Because you told me your name, your mother's situation, and your financial problems. Because you're sweating, your pupils are dilated from stress rather than substances, and you keep apologizing. People who are actually planning to shoot someone don't typically behave that way. Marcus stared at her with a mixture of admiration and confusion. You talk like you know about this stuff. I do know about this stuff, Sarah said simply. Now, please show me what you're holding. Very slowly, Marcus withdrew his hand from his jacket. In his trembling fingers was what appeared to be a black handgun. Sarah's trained eye immediately recognized it as a toy, a realistic-looking replica, but clearly plastic rather than metal. The proportions were slightly off, the weight was obviously wrong based on how he was holding it, and there was a small orange tip that had been colored over with black marker. Marcus, Sarah said gently, that's not a real gun. His shoulders sagged completely. I know, he whispered. I found it in my little brother's toy box. I couldn't afford a real one, and I thought maybe if it looked real enough. He trailed off, the futility of his plan now completely evident even to him. Sarah felt a wave of relief mixed with profound sadness. The immediate physical threat was over, but the desperation that had driven Marcus to this point was still very real. She also felt a familiar sense of responsibility, the same feeling that had driven her to join the military in the first place. Someone was in trouble, and she had the skills to help. Where's your little brother now? She asked. At home with Mom, Marcus replied. He's only 8. He doesn't understand why she's so sick all the time, why I can't afford to buy him the things other kids have, why our house smells like medicine and sadness. Sarah stepped out from behind the counter, moving slowly so as not to startle him. Marcus didn't back away, but he didn't put down the toy gun either. My name is Sarah Matthews, she said, and there are some things about me that you don't know. Like what? Like the fact that I spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL, Sarah replied calmly. The toy gun clattered to the floor as Marcus's hand went limp with shock. You're a what? Navy SEAL. Special Operations. The real deal. Sarah's voice carried a quiet authority that hadn't been there before, or rather, that she'd been deliberately suppressing. I've been in actual firefights, Marcus. I've taken down armed terrorists, conducted rescue operations, and survived situations that most people can't even imagine. So when a scared kid walks into my store with a toy gun and a desperate story, I tend to notice the difference. Marcus stepped backward, bumping into a display of potato chips. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never would have. Marcus, stop, Sarah interrupted. You're not in trouble. Not with me, anyway. But I just tried to rob you. No, you tried to rob the store. And you did it with a plastic gun while telling me your life story and apologizing every 30 seconds. If this were an actual crime, it would probably be the worst attempted robbery in history. Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled at that. It had seemed to be going pretty badly. Spectacularly badly, Sarah agreed. Which is actually a good thing, because it means you're not cut out for a life of crime. But that still leaves us with the problem of your mother's medical bills and your family's mortgage. You said the register only has a few $100s, Marcus pointed out. Even if you gave me all of it, which you shouldn't, it wouldn't be enough. You're right. But, Marcus, I said I knew about this stuff. I didn't just mean guns and tactical situations. I also meant financial emergencies and bureaucratic systems that fail people who need help the most. Sarah pulled out her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts. During my military service, I worked with a lot of veterans organizations, and civilian aid groups. I also learned how to navigate the kind of red tape that's probably been stopping you from getting assistance. Let me ask you something. Have you applied for emergency assistance through the state medical aid program? We tried, but they said our income was too high, Marcus replied. By like $50 a month. $50. Right, but did you apply for hardship exception? And did you file the supplemental forms for households with dependent medical expenses? Marcus stared at her blankly. There are supplemental forms? Oh, Marcus. Sarah shook her head sympathetically. The system is designed to make people give up. Most of the actual help is hidden behind forms that they don't tell you exist and requirements that change depending on who you talk to. But if you know how to work the system, she pulled up a number on her phone. I'm calling my friend Jessica Chun. She's a social worker who specializes in medical bankruptcy prevention. She knows every loophole, every emergency fund, every assistance program that exists. If there's a way to get your mother's treatments covered and keep your house, Jessica will find it. But it's almost 10 o'clock at night, Marcus protested. Jessica works weird hours, Sarah replied, hitting the dial button. She says medical emergencies don't wait for business hours, so neither does she. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. Sarah, please tell me you're calling with good news, and not because you're bored. Actually, I'm calling because I have someone here who needs help with medical assistance applications and emergency mortgage intervention, Sarah said. Young guy, single-income household, mother with serious medical condition, about to lose their house. Oh, honey. Jessica's voice immediately shifted into professional mode. Put me on speaker. Sarah gestured for Marcus to come closer, then activated the speakerphone. Jessica, meet Marcus. Marcus, this is Jessica Chun. She's about to become your new best friend. Hi, Marcus. Jessica's voice came through clearly. Sarah has good instincts about people, so if she says you need help, then you need help. Tell me about your situation. Don't leave out any details, even if they seem embarrassing or irrelevant. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus explained his family situation while Jessica asked pointed questions about income, medical expenses, insurance coverage, and previous assistance applications. Sarah listened, occasionally offering reassurance when Marcus became emotional talking about his mother's condition. Okay, Jessica said finally. Here's the good news. You've been getting screwed by the system, but it's fixable. The bad news is that everyone who was supposed to help you either didn't know what they were doing or didn't care enough to do their job properly. She proceeded to explain a series of programs and procedures that Marcus had never heard of despite months of trying to navigate the assistance system. Emergency medical hardship funds, mortgage assistance programs specifically for families with medical expenses, state programs that had different income requirements than federal ones, private charitable organizations that could provide immediate assistance while longer-term solutions were being processed. Most importantly, Jessica continued, there's an emergency fund through the hospital where your mother is receiving treatment. It's designed exactly for situations like yours, but they're not required to tell patients about it unless they specifically ask. Why wouldn't they tell people? Marcus asked, sounding bewildered. Because if everyone knew about it, they'd run out of money faster, Jessica replied bluntly. It's a terrible system, but that's how it works. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the people who know how to squeak properly get the help. Sarah watched Marcus's face transform as Jessica continued outlining concrete steps he could take immediately. Phone numbers to call first thing in the morning, forms to request, specific language to use when describing his situation. For the first time since he'd walked into the store, he looked hopeful. The most important thing, Jessica was saying, is that you need to start making calls tomorrow morning. Don't wait, don't procrastinate, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't qualify for something without seeing the actual requirements in writing. Sarah, are you going to help him navigate this? Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing not the desperate young man who'd walked in with a toy gun, but someone who was about to learn how to fight for his family in ways that actually worked. Absolutely, she said. We'll figure this out together. For the first time all evening, Marcus smiled. Really smiled, not the desperate grimace he'd been wearing before. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Sarah replied. Thank me when your mother is healthy and you still have a house. We've got work to do. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Marcus's house at precisely 8 a.m., carrying 2 large coffee cups and a folder thick with printed documents. She'd spent most of the night researching assistance programs, printing applications, and creating a strategic plan that would have impressed her former commanding officers with its thoroughness and attention to detail. The house was a small ranch-style home in one of Cedar Rapids' older neighborhoods, the kind of place where families had lived for generations before medical bills and economic uncertainty had started breaking apart the American dream. The lawn needed mowing, and there were medical supply deliveries stacked on the front porch, but the house itself was well-maintained, evidence of people who took pride in their home even when everything else was falling apart. Marcus answered the door, looking like he hadn't slept much either, but there was an energy in his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. Hope, Sarah realized, was a powerful stimulant. "You really came," he said, accepting one of the coffee cups gratefully. "I said I would," Sarah replied simply. "Now, are you ready to learn how to fight a bureaucracy?" Marcus led her inside, where she was introduced to his mother, Elena, a woman in her early 50s who looked older than her years, but still maintained the kind of dignified bearing that spoke of someone who refused to let illness define her completely. She was seated in a reclining chair near the living room window, and Foreline running into her arm from a portable pump. Evidence of the kind of round-the-clock medical care that insurance companies loved to find reasons not to cover. "Mom, this is Sarah," Marcus said. "She's the one I told you about." Elena studied Sarah with the sharp eyes of someone who'd learned to be skeptical of promises. "Marcus said you think you can help us. No offense, but we've heard that before." "None taken," Sarah replied, settling into a chair across from Elena. "And you're right to be skeptical. The difference is that I'm not promising to help you. I'm going to help you. Whether it works or not depends on factors outside my control, but I can guarantee you that we're going to try everything that's available." She opened her folder and spread out a series of documents on the coffee table. "I spent the night researching your specific situation. Elena, you have stage 3 pancreatic cancer with complications, correct?" "That's right," Elena confirmed. "And your current insurance is through Marcus's job at the warehouse." "Yes, but it's basic coverage. High deductible, limited network, caps on certain treatments," Elena explained with the weary expertise of someone who'd learned medical insurance terminology the hard way. Sarah nodded. "Which is why you're getting hit with bills for everything beyond basic chemotherapy. Here's what most people don't know. There are 17 different assistance programs that apply to your specific situation, but you have to apply to each one separately, and most of them don't advertise their existence." She pulled out the first set of forms. "We're going to start with the hospital's own charity care program. Marcus, you mentioned that your mother is receiving treatment at Mercy Medical Center, right?" "Right. Mercy has a financial assistance program that can cover up to 90% of medical bills for families who meet certain criteria. The income limits are higher than most people think because they factor in medical expenses when calculating your effective household income." Elena leaned forward slightly. "We asked about charity care when I was first diagnosed. They said we make too much money." "Who did you talk to?" Sarah asked. "The billing department." "That was your first mistake," Sarah said with a slight smile. Billing departments are trained to collect money, not to give it away. They'll tell you about payment plans all day long, but they're not necessarily informed about assistance programs. We need to talk to the Patient Financial Services Department, and we need to ask for a supervisor who specializes in charity care applications. She handed Marcus a script written on index cards. "When you call this morning, and you're calling this morning, you're going to use exactly this language. Don't improvise. Don't try to explain your situation in your own words, and don't let them transfer you to billing. You're going to ask specifically for a charity care application packet for families with medical hardships." Marcus read through the script, his eyebrows rising. "This sounds like you're speaking a different language." "I am," Sarah confirmed. "I'm speaking bureaucracy. It's like any other foreign language. Once you learn the key phrases, doors start opening." She turned to Elena. "Have you been receiving any kind of disability benefits?" "I applied, but they said I don't qualify because Marcus can still work and support the household." "That's probably true for regular disability benefits," Sarah agreed. "But there are medical disability classifications that have different criteria. More importantly, there are caregiver support programs that Marcus might qualify for since he's essentially functioning as your primary care coordinator." Sarah pulled out another set of forms. "Marcus, how many hours per week would you say you spend on medical-related tasks for your mother? Doctor's appointments, insurance calls, medication management, coordinating with home health services?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe 20 hours. Try again. Really think about it. Include drive time to appointments, time spent on hold with insurance companies, time researching treatment options, time advocating with medical providers." As Marcus considered the question more carefully, Elena spoke up. He's basically made me his full-time job. He modified his work schedule so he can take me to appointments. He spends hours every week fighting with the insurance company. He researches every treatment option and medication. He's learned more about pancreatic cancer than some medical students probably know. 40 hours, Marcus said quietly. Minimum. Some weeks, more than that. Then, congratulations, Sarah said. You're an unpaid caregiver working more than full-time hours while also maintaining paid employment. There are programs designed specifically for people in your situation. For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked them through application after application, teaching them not just how to fill out forms, but how to present their situation in the language that bureaucratic systems were designed to recognize. She showed them how to document expenses they hadn't realized were deductible. She explained how to escalate appeals that had been wrongly denied. She even taught them how to record their phone calls with insurance companies, legally, in Iowa, as long as they announced they were doing it. The most important thing to remember, Sarah said as they worked through a particularly complex application for emergency utility assistance, is that these systems aren't designed to help you, but they're also not designed to prevent you from getting help if you know how to ask for it correctly. It's like a video game where someone forgot to publish the instruction manual. At 11 a.m., Marcus made his first call to the hospital's patient financial services department. Sarah sat beside him, pointing to relevant sections of his script and giving him thumbs up when he used the correct terminology. The conversation lasted 45 minutes, but by the end, Marcus had an appointment with a charity care specialist for that afternoon and a promise that Elena's account would be flagged for review. I can't believe how differently they treated me when I used those exact words, Marcus said after hanging up. It's not magic, Sarah explained. It's just that most people don't know the system exists, and the people who work in the system assume that if you're calling and asking for specific things by their correct names, someone must have told you about them. It's like having a password. The second call was to the state's Emergency Mortgage Assistance Program. This conversation was more challenging. The initial contact person clearly didn't want to deal with what sounded like a complicated case. But Sarah had anticipated this, and she'd armed Marcus with the specific statute numbers and program codes that would force them to at least review his application. You're like a legal ninja, Elena observed, watching Sarah guide Marcus through the conversation. I prefer bureaucratic translator, Sarah replied. But I'll take ninja. By lunchtime, they had submitted applications for 6 different assistance programs, scheduled 3 in-person appointments, and received confirmation numbers for emergency reviews of Elena's insurance claims. More importantly, Marcus was beginning to understand the logic behind the system, how to speak its language, and navigate its procedures. This is incredible, he said over sandwiches that Sarah had picked up from a local deli. I've been trying to get help for months, and in one morning, we've accomplished more than I did in all that time. That's the difference between working in the system and working against it, Sarah explained. You were trying to get help by explaining your situation and hoping someone would care. Now you're requesting specific assistance using the correct procedures. The result looks the same to you, but to the bureaucracy, they're completely different things. Elena had been quiet throughout most of the morning, but now she spoke up. Sarah, I have to ask you something. Why are you doing this? I mean, really, Marcus told me what happened last night, and I understand that you wanted to help him avoid doing something stupid. But this, she gestured at the piles of paperwork. This is way beyond what anyone would expect. Sarah considered the question carefully. It was something she'd been asking herself since she'd arrived that morning. Why was she spending her day off helping people she barely knew navigate problems that weren't her responsibility? When I was deployed overseas, she said finally, I met a lot of people who were caught in systems that didn't work for them. People who weren't enemies or allies, just regular people trying to take care of their families under impossible circumstances. Most of the time, there wasn't anything I could do to help them. My mission was about other things. She paused, looking out the window at the quiet neighborhood street. But now I'm home, and I don't have a mission anymore. My skills are designed for solving problems and protecting people, but I haven't figured out how to use them in civilian life. When Marcus walked into that store last night, I realized that maybe I'd been looking at it wrong. Maybe the mission isn't different. Maybe I just needed to find a right battlefield. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances, and Sarah could see that her answer had satisfied them in a way that a simpler explanation wouldn't have. So what's our next move? Marcus asked. Sarah smiled and pulled out her phone. Now we make the calls that are going to save your house and get your mother the care she needs. But first, I need to teach you how to sound like someone who knows exactly what they're talking about, even when you don't. Another secret language? The most important one, Sarah confirmed. Confident competence. It's the difference between being helped and being dismissed, and I guarantee you that by the end of today, you're going to sound like someone who belongs in every system we contact. As they prepared for the afternoon's appointments, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The satisfaction of being exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The battlefield might look different than the one she'd known before, but the mission remained the same, protecting people who needed protection and using her skills to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The war against bureaucratic indifference was about to begin in earnest. 6 weeks later, Sarah was restocking the magazine rack at the convenience store when she heard the familiar chime of the front door. She looked up to see Marcus entering, but this was a different Marcus than the desperate young man who'd walked in with a toy gun and a failing plan. This Marcus stood straighter, smiled more easily, and moved with the confident purpose of someone who'd learned how to navigate the world effectively. "Hey there, stranger," Sarah called out. "How are things going?" "Better," Marcus replied, and the simple word carried the weight of a transformation that had taken weeks of phone calls, appointments, appeals, and small victories. Actually, a lot better. He approached the counter where Sarah was working, carrying a manila folder that she recognized as one of the organizing systems they developed during their bureaucratic campaign. "I wanted to give you an update on everything, and I wanted to ask you something. Good news, I hope." "The best news," Marcus confirmed, his smile widening. "Mom's treatment is fully covered now. The hospital's charity care program approved our application, and they're not just covering future expenses, they're forgiving everything we owed from the past 6 months. $43,000 just gone." Sarah felt a familiar rush of satisfaction, the same feeling she'd experienced during successful military operations. "That's fantastic. What about the house?" "The emergency mortgage assistance came through too," Marcus said, his voice still carrying a note of disbelief. "They're not just helping with the current payments, they're restructuring the entire loan to account for our medical expenses. Our monthly payment is going to be almost $400 less than it was before. And your mother's condition? Stable. The doctors are optimistic about her response to the new treatment protocol. She's got energy she hasn't had in months, and the pain management is so much better now that we're not worrying about rationing medications because of cost." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction and everything to do with simple human happiness. "Marcus, that's incredible. You should be proud of yourself. You learned a completely new skill set and used it to save your family. With your help," Marcus pointed out. "I never would have figured any of this out on my own." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But once you learned how to do it, you did all the work. I just gave you the map. You walked the path." Marcus set his folder on the counter and opened it, revealing a carefully organized collection of documents. Confirmation letters, approval notices, appointment schedules, and what appeared to be a detailed spreadsheet tracking various assistance programs and their status. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," he said. "Look at this." He handed her a letter from the hospital's patient financial services department. Sarah scanned it quickly, recognizing the formal language of bureaucratic approval, but also noticing something unusual in the final paragraph. "They want to interview you," she said, looking up at Marcus with surprise. "Not just me. Us. Both of us." Marcus's excitement was barely contained. Apparently, the way we presented our case and documented everything was so thorough that they want to understand how we did it. The supervisor said it was the most complete charity care application they'd ever received. Sarah read the letter more carefully. The hospital was requesting a meeting to discuss their application process, with an eye toward improving their own procedures for helping patients navigate the assistance system. They were also asking if Marcus and Sarah would be willing to share their approach with other families facing similar challenges. "They want us to help other people," Sarah said quietly, understanding the implications immediately. "That's what I was hoping you'd say," Marcus replied. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this for weeks. What we did, what you taught me, it shouldn't be special knowledge. Every family dealing with medical emergencies should know this stuff. But they don't, and the system seems designed to keep them from figuring it out." Sarah felt a familiar stirring, the same feeling she'd experienced when she first understood that her military skills could be applied to civilian problems. "What are you thinking?" Marcus pulled out another document, this one handwritten in his careful script. "I've been talking to Jessica Chun, your social worker friend, and she's been helping me research this. Do you know how many families in Iowa alone are dealing with medical bankruptcies right now? A lot, I imagine. Thousands. And most of them are going through exactly what I was going through. Try and navigate a system that nobody explains to them, getting turned down for assistance they actually qualify for, losing their homes, and going into debt for medical care that should be covered. Sarah looked at Marcus's notes, recognizing the same methodical approach to research and planning that they'd used to solve his family's crisis. You've been busy. I've been obsessed, Marcus admitted, and I think I know why. For the first time in my life, I'm good at something that actually matters. I can talk to insurance companies, I can fill out assistance applications, I can navigate bureaucratic systems that used to terrify me. And, Sarah, I'm not the only one who needs these skills. He pulled out a business plan, basic, but surprisingly thorough, that outlined a concept for what he was calling a patient advocacy service. The idea was elegantly simple. Marcus would use the skills Sarah had taught him to help other families navigate medical assistance programs, insurance appeals, and financial aid applications. I've already helped 3 other families, Marcus continued. Word got around the neighborhood about what happened with Mom's treatment, and people started asking for advice. I walked them through the same process you taught me, and, Sarah, it worked. All 3 families got assistance they'd been told they didn't qualify for. Sarah studied the business plan, impressed by the thoroughness of Marcus's research and the clarity of his vision. But more than that, she was impressed by what the plan represented. Someone taking a terrible experience and transforming it into a way to help others avoid the same suffering. This is really good work, Marcus, she said sincerely. But I'm guessing you didn't just come here to show me your business plan? No, Marcus agreed, his nervousness showing for the first time since he'd entered the store. I came here to ask if you'd be my partner. The words hung between them, and Sarah felt the familiar weight of a life-changing decision. She looked around the convenience store, the familiar shelves, the predictable routine, the safe anonymity that had seemed so appealing 6 months ago. Then, she looked at Marcus's business plan, seeing not just a document, but a mission that would use every skill she developed during 8 years of military service. Tell me more, she said. For the next hour, Marcus outlined his vision for a service that would bridge the gap between people in medical crises and the assistance systems designed to help them. Sarah would bring her strategic planning skills and her ability to research and understand complex systems. Marcus would bring his lived experience and his natural empathy for people facing impossible situations. Together, they would create something that could genuinely change lives. The thing is, Marcus said as he concluded his presentation, I can do this alone, and I probably will if you're not interested. But, Sarah, you have skills that I don't have. You can see systems from a strategic level that I can't. You can research and organize information in ways that would take me forever to learn. And, honestly, you have the kind of confidence that makes bureaucrats take you seriously. Sarah thought about her transition from military to civilian life, about the months of feeling like her skills were obsolete and her sense of purpose was lost. She thought about the satisfaction she'd felt during their 6-week campaign to save Marcus's family, and the way that helping him had reminded her why she'd joined the military in the first place. What would you need from me? She asked. Everything, Marcus replied honestly. I'm good at talking to people and understanding their problems, but I need someone who can develop systems and train people and scale this up beyond just me helping one family at a time. I need someone who thinks strategically and can turn what we learn into a replicable process. Sarah looked at Marcus's earnest face, thinking about the scared young man with the toy gun who'd walked into her store 6 weeks ago. The transformation was remarkable, but more than that, it was purposeful. He hadn't just solved his own problems. He developed the capability to solve other people's problems too. I have one condition, Sarah said finally. Whatever it is, yes. We do this right. Professional organization, proper training, real systems that can help thousands of people, not just dozens. If we're going to take on the bureaucracy, we're going to do it with the same level of planning and precision that I'd use for a military operation. Marcus's smile was brighter than any expression she'd seen from him, including the day they'd gotten the news that his mother's treatment would be covered. Does that mean you're in? Sarah looked around the convenience store one more time, then back at the business plan that represented a chance to use her skills for something that mattered. Yeah, she said, surprising herself with how easy the decision felt. I'm in. 3 months later, Matthews Rivera Patient Advocacy Services had helped 87 families navigate medical assistance programs, with a success rate that had attracted attention from social workers, medical centers, and state assistance programs across Iowa and neighboring states. Sarah had developed a comprehensive training manual based on their methods, and Marcus had become a sought-after speaker at medical social work conferences. But the moment Sarah remembered most clearly wasn't any of their professional successes. It was the afternoon when Elena, fully recovered and back to her job as an elementary school teacher, had stopped by their small office to deliver a batch of homemade cookies and a simple thank you card. "You saved our family," the card read. "Now go save some more." Sarah had kept the card on her desk, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil or in dramatic circumstances. Sometimes they're fought in government offices and insurance company call centers, one form at a time, one family at a time, one small victory at a time. And sometimes the person who looks least dangerous, the quiet convenience store clerk with the steady voice and the unshakable calm, turns out to be exactly the kind of dangerous that the world needs.